When we talk about trauma, we tend to imagine something huge happening and something very, very obvious, like some kind of firecracker exploding next to a dog. But what if we would actually not see something as a problem at all, but it is still traumatic to the dog? In today's episode of A Dog's Soul and Empath's Guide to Your Dog's Feelings, we talk about Hank, a 13-year-old mix who got traumatized, and his parents didn't really notice that at first. So stay tuned and have fun. Alright, so Hank was a livestock guardian mix. He was a big dog, and he had made some experiences that weren't really something we would classify as impactful. But for him, they were so intense that he actually didn't want to get into situations like that again. And it was situations that they actually needed in everyday life to provide Hank with options to just be a dog. So let's start at the beginning. When Hank was a puppy, he was put into a car to drive to places, right? This is normal. We do that. But for Hank, every single car ride was pure horror because he got car sick and he vomited all over the car, and of course that wasn't a pleasant experience for everybody involved, especially not for Hank. He developed a real fear of the car, a very deeply rooted fear, because the first huge change in his life was a very long car ride from his original country to his adoptive parents, right? So he was originally from somewhere else and he had to be transported to get to the people who adopted him. So the first car ride was a negative experience, and every single car ride that followed was a negative experience as well. And unfortunately for Hank, the car sickness stuck. So for a lot of puppies, they have not developed the sense of balance yet. So that's when they get car sick. But when they grow up, they lose the car sickness. For some dogs, though, that doesn't happen and they stay with this issue. Hank was such a dog. So he got car sick even when he reached puberty, and still he was asked to step into the car and ride in the car to some kind of a destination. And his parents hoped that he will just get used to it when he had to do it a lot, right? This is a very common assumption. For Hank, his fear got worse and worse and worse with every single car ride, which is understandable, right? Because every single car ride was pure horror for him. He didn't feel well, and of course our dogs connect the dots. Our dogs know that when they get into the car again, they will get sick again. So Hank started avoiding the car, and he started avoiding the car from a greater and greater and greater distance. And he was a very big dog, so there was a point in his life when his parents were no longer able to pick him up and put him in a car. At least not without putting a lot of effort in it, and a heavy, huge dog struggling in your arms is not that easy to carry. So they stopped and they figured, well, if we can't take him in a car to places where he could just be a dog and sniff around and do awesome things because they were living in a city, they decided to take the bus. But when they got Hank to the bus, he got startled by the sound of the hydraulics of the bus. So he didn't want to get in, he wanted to get away. But since they had decided to go someplace nice with him, they kind of dragged him into the bus. And they put a muzzle on him that wasn't a good fit and that he didn't know either. So for Hank, the whole thing was very overwhelming. He didn't have the time he needed to check out what's actually going on. He was just put into a vehicle that moved again, so odds are good that he got sick again. He did not vomit, which was awesome for the other passengers, right? Because a vomiting dog is not that pleasant to have on a bus. But he was drooling a lot and had a stressed face, so it probably was still a sense of nausea for him. And in addition to all that, he was afraid of people. So, of course, there were people in that bus, and it was a closed space, a very tight space, and the people didn't pay much attention to him. Some people were a little scared because he was big and black, and that's scary for some people. But most of them, since he was fluffy and his mom talked very nicely to him, came really close. And he was not a dog who would snap at people. He was a dog who would run away from them, but he couldn't because he was in a closed space. And that was scaring him a lot. So what happened was, after they got to nature and had a nice walk with him, it was even harder to get him on the bus. And from that day on, he was avoiding bus stations, and he was very good at spotting bus stations. He generalized it pretty quickly to every public transportation on the street, so trams as well and trains as well, since it was kind of a similar setting. So people standing around and there was sound and then something coming. So they could not take him in public transportation at all. He was not having it. He was really stepping on the brakes in a pretty large distance, so it was too large to drag him, and again, he was too heavy to carry. So they couldn't get him out of the city anymore. And that was a huge issue for him because he was afraid of people. He was also afraid of dogs, and he was afraid of a lot of sounds. Now, this was another traumatic experience he had on New Year's Eve. He was pretty relaxed, and then something like a trash can, I think, exploded pretty close to the window of their apartment, and that scared Hank into a panic. And that's when every shot or every sound that was remotely like a shot became a problem for him. And again, fear generalizes very quickly. So he generalized that as well, all the fears. So at first it was just some humans, but after the experience on the bus, it was every human. And if you're living in the city, you know how difficult it can be to maneuver a dog around humans when he's afraid of them. And there are quite some humans in the city, even in not that densely populated districts. Still, a lot of humans. So, he was afraid of humans, he was afraid of sounds, and he generalized the sounds to car doors, the jingle of a leash, or the tags on a dog, or keys, everything that sounded remotely like a dog coming toward him. He was afraid of the hydraulic of the bus, and that generalized to wind moving, some ads banners, or plastic bags, things like that. So things that sounded a little bit like the hydraulics, and you can't avoid wind. That's really hard to do. All right. And of course, anything that sounded anything like a shot. So some kind of bang somewhere, and again, in a city that happens pretty often. How often do you come across somebody slamming a car door or a door on a house or running into something or anything that sounds like that? And that was when the quality of life for Hank became very, very diminished. And that's when Hank needed medication. Because whenever everything scares you, everything outside, and to be honest, everything inside as well. Because since this generalizes so quickly, household sounds become a problem as well. So Hank was also afraid of silverware clinging on a plate. He was afraid of people knocking on the door. That was horrible in two factors, because it was an announcement for people coming into his space, and it was the sound. Also, whenever his humans put down something heavy on a wooden surface, and a lot of furniture is wooden and a lot of things are heavy. So a full glass of water, for example, or a heavier plate, they put it down a little too fast and it made a banging sound. Hank was gone. He was just gone. So that's why he needed medication. That is not a life that's in any way relaxed. And of course, in puberty, it showed in his behavior. He was barking constantly. He was not listening outside. He was just not cooperative in any way, even though he tried. But whenever he tried, he got startled again by something. So he needed medication. And with medication, it was possible to start training and start working on a lot of different sounds. At the beginning, not even the sounds he was afraid of, but any kind of sound to just get the training process started. And since he needed time away from the city, his parents had to start working on the car again. So the priorities were the sounds first, because he had to go outside and he had to feel a little bit comfortable, at least outside, so he could actually participate in training. So he learned to come to his parents whenever he got scared, and they would do things with him that helped him. So a little bit of sniffing, he could get into that pretty quickly. They would massage him a little bit, but not in a traditional sense, but with isometric exercises. So putting a little bit of pressure, for example, on the upper thigh, and waiting for him to press back. The shoulder worked fine as well. So he could lean into a person and get a boost of oxytocin, and that felt good for him, right? And he also, and that was his idea actually, started to put his head between his parents' thighs. That dampened the sounds, right? And it was a great idea, and they rewarded him for it, so he did that pretty fast. And those things helped him to not get into a panic state whenever he got startled outside. Also, he needed more confidence in general. So his parents started to let him do things in his own speed. That was very, very important for him. And it would have been very important for him as a young dog, especially. Would have prevented the high stress level all the time. Many dogs, but livestock guardian dogs in particular, often need a lot of time to process things that are happening. They watch stuff, and they watch for a long time, and they have to assess if things are dangerous or if there is anything rewarding for them if they do XYZ. So they need their time. For us humans, that often is a challenge. But if we don't train ourselves, we overwhelm our dogs. And again, that leads to a high stress level. So Whenever they started to just let him watch and let him process things in his speed, he was a lot more cooperative in training and in day-to-day life. So, yes, it took longer to walk him because he sniffed a lot and he sniffed long, but it got his stress level down and he was able to listen again. That was awesome, right? And also, whenever they found something he could step on or walk over or explore, anything like that, any new surface, park benches, things like that, they asked him to step on or explore in his own speed. And that gave him confidence because he was in control of the situation, he was in control of his own body, nobody was pulling on him anymore, and that was awesome. Also, things he got startled by but was not panicked, like a plastic bag moving in the wind. He could check that out, actually, whenever he had the time to do that in his own speed. And again, that gave him confidence. Every little puzzle he could solve by himself gave him confidence. And another huge factor in confidence building for him was having choice. So being able to choose to go left or right, for example, because we don't always know what our dogs hear or see or smell, right? So if our dogs don't want to walk left for whatever reason, then we have to ask ourselves, isn't it possible to just go right? And for him, that was huge. So again, you could see in his face that his eyes would light up and he would look at his humans again. He would participate again. He would listen to them, all those things. So you could really see that he was relieved that he didn't have to walk into scary situations anymore. And of course, every training had to be done in baby steps. Same thing with the car. When he learned to get close to a car again, it took a long time and a lot of positive experiences to counteract the negative ones because they were rooted deep, right? So a lot of fun games, a lot of things that just triggered positive emotions in him. And again, as soon as he was close to the car again, and even in getting close, he had a choice. He didn't have to come close. He didn't have to get in. He could choose. He could choose to participate. He could choose to check it out. And of course, he was rewarded when he got closer, but he could also get a reward for checking in with his humans and not get closer. And that sparked his curiosity. It sparked the possibility for him to get curious again. So what happened was he started to check out the car more and more, and they started to do sniffing games around the car at first and then in the car. And he could actually get in the car with a ramp, so all by himself, all in his own speed, and check out the inside of the car. And of course, since he got car sick, he needed medication for car rides as well. But they didn't need that on a daily basis, right? They just needed that to get him out of the city once in a while and into nature and give him the option of just being a dog. They also found a nice spot close to them so they could walk there that was green and just a spot where he could sniff and enjoy himself and not have anybody want anything from him, right? So all of these things helped a lot, and it made his life increase in quality a lot. Still, the fear of the sounds kind of stuck. So even though he had a strategy to deal with it, to cope with those situations, even on New Year's Eve, what really made a huge difference was when his hearing capacity deteriorated. And that shows how intense this fear was, even after training and training and training and training. So, what I think is the takeaway message from this case is that we really should watch our dogs. We can never know when a little overwhelm leads to a huge impact in quality of life, a huge trauma. And getting rid of a trauma is really tricky. It's hard. It takes a lot of effort on many angles, and it's a lot easier to listen to your dog when your dog is telling you, this is too much for me. That's something we have to work on ourselves. It's not easy for us, but we can get there, and it makes a huge difference for our dogs. So tell me in the comments if this happened to you, if you ever overwhelmed your dog. Definitely happened to me. And I wish you a lot of fun training, a lot of fun listening to your dog, and we'll see each other next time. Bye.